Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are going to dive deep into the sprawling, fascinating history of the New York City subway system. But we aren't just going to look at it as a piece of everyday public transit. No, we're going to explore this massive underground network as a living, breathing organism that has evolved, adapted, and survived for well over a century. So let's peel back the concrete and steel and see what's really going on beneath our feet. All right, let's just jump right in with a kind of crazy question. What if the first subway in New York wasn't electric, but was actually powered by wind? I want you to imagine descending under Broadway in 1870. This is decades before the first official subway line opened. You step into a train car, the doors close, and you are pushed entirely by air pressure from a massive 48-ton blower nicknamed the Western Tornado. Sounds literally like science fiction, right? But it actually happened. This was the actual brainchild of an inventor named Alfred Eiley Beach. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the sheer ambition of the era. Beach built a secret pneumatic tube experiment, an extravagant one-block demonstration hidden right under the noses of corrupt politicians like Boss Tweed. See, Tweed had refused to support the project, so Beach actually got his permits by claiming he was just building a system of postal tubes. Down in this hidden station, New Yorkers were treated to the whole shebang. Frescoes, zirconia lamps, a goldfish pond, and even a grand piano in the waiting room. It was designed to show the public the incredible, clean potential of underground travel. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of this underground world. We'll be covering 1. The secret pneumatic subway, 2. Unifying the underground maze, 3. The subway map wars, 4. Graffiti and the canvas, and 5. The modern mega machine. Okay, let's dig right into part 1, the secret pneumatic subway, the 1870 wind-powered experiment. 400,000. That is a staggering number. Even though Beach's track basically just ran to a dead end 300 feet away, this pneumatic curiosity sold over 400,000 rides at 25 cents a pop in its very first year. People were absolutely captivated. Unfortunately, a stock market crash in 1873 completely buried the project and the tunnel was sealed up. It was practically forgotten until 1912, when workers excavating for a new subway line accidentally dug into it and found the rotting wooden car and the remains of that grand piano. No way, right? Moving right along to part 2, unifying the underground maze, from corporate rivals to one system. So the actual subway we know and rely on today, born in 1904. But it definitely didn't start out as one big public service. It was originally a chaotic maze built by warring corporate rivals. For decades, you had 3 distinct, fiercely competitive entities operating under the streets. You had the IRT, the BMT, and later the city-owned IND, which was explicitly built to compete with the private guys. They each had their own tracks, their own stations, and they absolutely refused to cooperate. So the crucial point here is that it took a massive acquisition in 1940 by the city of New York to finally buy out the bankrupt private companies and merge them into a single unified transit authority. Now, actually consolidating these totally separate systems, that required some absolute engineering miracles. We are talking about connecting deep-bore tunnels beneath rivers and weaving incredibly complex track interlockings together. They even had to deal with the fact that the old IRT trains were physically too narrow to fit properly in the BMT stations. It was like fitting a square peg in a round hole. And they had to do all of this heavy construction while maintaining the heartbeat of the city, keeping surface traffic flowing right above the workers' heads. Which brings us to part 3, the subway map wars, design versus navigation. You see, physically unifying the tracks was honestly kind of easy compared to unifying the map. This sparked an intellectual war over graphic design that lasted for decades. In 1972, the MTA introduced a map by designer Massimo Vignelli. It was a minimalist diagram, aesthetically pure with brilliant geometric lines, literally a masterpiece of modern art. But there was a huge problem. Average riders found it completely confusing. It totally ignored exact geography above ground, so people just couldn't figure out where to transfer. So, by 1979, the MTA had to go back to the drawing board and replace it with Michael Hertz and Nobo Sirayasi's geographic map. It's much messier, for sure, but highly functional, and it's the foundation of the map you still see in stations today. Critics of Vignelli's beautifully rigid design argued that, quote, the concept of the 1972 map was kept intact, totally ignoring the need for a clear navigation tool. But here's the wild part. While it failed as a daily navigation tool for millions of rushing New Yorkers, it survived as a celebrated piece of art. An updated version of his map was even featured in a 2008 special edition of Men's Vogue, and limited prints of it actually sell for $300 at the Transit Museum. It's just a perfect example of that constant tension between beautiful design and pure raw utility. And that perfectly transitions us to Section 4, Graffiti and the Canvas, the underground art movement. Because if the map was a canvas for professional graphic designers, the physical trains became a canvas for someone else entirely. In the 1970s, the visual identity of the subway was completely taken over by the city's youth, effectively turning train cars into moving galleries. What started as simple marker tags in the early 70s, like the famous Taki 183, who was really just a bicycle messenger writing his name on his route, exploded into massive, top-to-bottom aerosol murals. The city was strapped for cash and couldn't clean them fast enough. But eventually, in 1984, the MTA launched a fierce, 5-year clean train movement, deploying razor wire, guard dogs, and harsh chemical washes. By 1989, they had ultimately purged painted trains from the system entirely. Looking at this objectively, though, this era was incredibly culturally significant. It birthed 5 distinct styles of street expression that you still see globally today. From the quick tags and massive murals of the subway cars to pre-produced stickers, crisp stencils, and wheat pasting up on the streets. The big takeaway here is how a practice that began as illegal subway vandalism fundamentally influenced global pop culture. It eventually transitioned straight into prestigious high art studios with legendary figures like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the modern mega machine, surviving the 21st century. We've talked about the history, the mergers, the maps, and the art. Now we really have to face the reality of operating this massive, aging infrastructure today. The stakes of maintaining this system are just incredibly high. Look at these wild fluctuations. The subway hit its absolute peak right after World War II in 1946, moving over 2 billion people. Then watch it plummet by half during the gritty high-crime era of the 1980s. It steadily climbed its way back up over the next few decades, only to suffer a devastating plunge down to just 639 million during the 2020 pandemic. Navigating those wild shifts required dramatic changes in policy. In the 1990s, the city's approach was heavily influenced by the broken windows theory. The basic idea here was that visible signs of disorder, like a literal broken window, or in the subway's case, graffiti and fare evasion, create an environment that just encourages more serious crime. This led to a massive crackdown on visible infractions to reclaim control of the stations. It remains a highly debated strategy, but it fundamentally changed the policing of the underground. So what about today? Well, the struggle isn't about merging rival companies anymore. It's about fighting time and nature. The MTA is rushing to modernize ancient 100-year-old analog signals with digital systems. They're rolling out contactless Omni payments to speed things up. But honestly, perhaps the biggest hurdle is fortifying these early 20th century tunnels against climate change and catastrophic flooding, like what we saw during Hurricane Sandy, just to keep this mega machine serving millions of people every single day. So the next time you're riding these historic rails, listening to the screech of the metal, and feeling that rush of air, consider this. With rising seas, advancing tech, and a constantly shifting population, what is the next incredible layer of this underground organism going to look like for the generations of tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and seriously, keep your eyes open the next time you head below the streets.